Hello and welcome once again to my garage. It is an absolute shit show in here. Just completely full of parts that I've been accumulating for the rebuild that is impending. It's been a long time since my last video, and that's because I am still waiting on piston rings that are coming from Stuttgart. So I'm waiting on the Germans.
Auf der Heide blüht ein kleines Blümelein.
Zusammenbau eines Sturmgeschützes.
Und das heißt Erika.
While I'm waiting, I've been doing a lot of cleaning of all different types of parts, every nut, bolt, and X, Y, and Z you can think of. And what I got to do today is lap my valves and rebuild my cylinder heads. So these are the aforementioned cylinder heads, and what I've got to do before I can reassemble them is each of these valves is going to go in one of these here holes, all right? And they've got to be perfectly airtight. Where they mate together, where this valve comes and sits down into that hole, that has to be a perfect airtight seal. Because this, as we know, is the combustion chamber. We want to hold that explosion in. That's what creates all our force. So the way we do that is with a substance called lapping compound. It's basically liquid sandpaper. I've got all my valves out of the cylinder heads, and I did not institute any organizational regime to keep track of which valve went in which hole, because I knew I was gonna have to lap them. And when we're lapping them, we're actually kind of marrying each valve to its hole.
Marriage. Marriage is what brings us together today.
So I'm gonna go ahead and show you the procedure. Take my suction cup tool, squish them onto here, pull out this valve. Now, we are going to put a dab of oil, just regular old motor oil. I guess you could use WD-40 or assembly lube, whatever you wanted. I'm using motor oil. Get this stem lubed up. We're gonna get our lapping compound and just goo a little bit on here, onto this beveled edge. And then we're gonna insert it in the hole. And with a fire starter technique, and you can hear that grit is grinding away material and mating these two surfaces together. And we want to pick up and rotate every once in a while. If you listen, you can hear the tone of the grit fade away. And that means that section has been kind of worked out. You rotate it and do it again in a different spot. Hear how that evened out? Now what we're gonna do is pull this bad boy out, clean off both surfaces, starting with the valve, and we'll see our work. Now you can see there is a kind of bright gray, or rather an obvious gray line, almost 1/8 of an inch wide. That is new material. I'm gonna clean out this side on the cylinder head, reinsert it. And a good test is now when I push and try to turn, it doesn't move at all. It is locked in.
Marriage, that blessed arrangement.
So that one's good. Now, since this one is lapped, right? They are wed. They are man and wife. Never shall they part, okay? So I have to keep track from this point on that this valve stays in this hole.
That dream within a dream.
So obviously the lapping compound is an abrasive. It's got little grits of I don't know, sand, abrasive stuff in it. And one thing that engines really hate is little pieces of grit in them. So I'm gonna wanna use some brake clean, copious amount of it, to make sure that all of these are cleaned out and that there's no more of that abrasive in there. Pretty easy procedure, but I've got to make sure that these valves stay with those holes. So I'm going to take these two out, take them out in pairs, and spray that down real good. Spray down the valve stems. And that can go back in. Valve stem. And that's the procedure. Once they're all cleaned, set them back in their respective holes, move on to the next pair, and repeat. So now we're back in the garage, got them all cleaned up, but we don't want to force them down in there because there's no lubrication. That brake clean just stripped them down to the bare metal. So now, before we seat them all the way back down, I want to get a little bit of motor oil, dip each stem in there, and kind of get it lubed up and in there. And now these guys are completely 100% married, man and wife.
And love, true love, will follow you forever.
And they don't spin, even with that lube. When I push, they don't spin because they're just perfectly locked in there. And we do the same procedure all the way down. So the next step is to put on each one of those valves a valve stem seal. There are a couple types of valve stem seal. The one I'm going with is the old-fashioned kind, what are known as umbrella seals. And they're called that because they're kind of shaped like an umbrella. The new ones are all fancy, they're rubber, and they clip down onto the valve stem guides. I'm not gonna go with that. This is an old rat rod, as it were. So we're just gonna keep it classy and go with the old school umbrella seals. I'm just gonna scoot these guys down on top of these. Try to be gentle, because supposedly they'll tear. Next thing we're gonna do is put the valve springs and valve spring retainers in place. On these type of Chevy heads, known as 993s, you're gonna have two different types of valve spring retainers. One is a solid piece of metal. The other is two parts pressed in to one another, and they spin and rotate. The spinny rotatey guys go on the exhaust. That's probably important to remember. Spring over. Then we're gonna go ahead and put these caps on each. We're gonna get our retainers. And you can kind of look in here and see that the exhaust ones, the exhaust valves, obviously come out of the exhaust ports. So those guys get spinners. The next step is we've got to get out our old friend, the spring compression tool, compress all those springs, slip in the retainers, and we're pretty much good to go. Here we go, we got a better view of what I'm dealing with. This is the one that I've finished. It's got the keepers in there. Appears to be good to go. Just for demonstration purposes, here's the valve stem. Here's those two grooves. We want to put the O-ring on the second groove eventually. And this little guy right here is the umbrella seal. We've got him on. So, put our valve spring, followed by the valve spring retainer. Then we get our compression tool. Line it up on the bottom. And we compress that valve spring. And we take our O-ring, slide it on to the first groove, out of the first groove, and down to the second groove. And we're seated there, 5x5. Okay, then take our keepers. And we set them with their little groove into the place like that. And we slowly let go and hope that they catch. I'm kind of torquing this, twisting it a little bit so that it comes up evenly. And there we go. She's kept.
Skip to the end.
Line up on the valve. On the bottom side. Compress the spring. Only on. And by the way, all the hype about these things ripping, totally not true. These can be pretty rough with them. In case you didn't know this. Okay. Got that spring on. 2 more retainers. One half, got a clamshell. Right. And bring it up. And she's kept.
So that is one assembled cylinder head. I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the other, but you don't need to see that. So thanks for watching.
Man and wife. Say man and wife. Man and wife.
Escort the bride to the honeymoon suite. I'll be there shortly.